beer products, namely ales and stout, naturally conditioned beers in particular. Also, the fact that we've got this other core capability of extract manufacture with the home brew and the malt extract gives us a second string to the bow. And more recently, we started an interstate operation called Premium Beverages in 2003, which has allowed us to again focus on selling beer outside of South Australia, and that's been the driver of growth through from 2003 onwards. So, what is the impact of the recession on beer? And this is just a nice slide of ours to show you what our beer sales have done over the last 20 years or so. You can see in the early 90s there was a decline in our beer sales. We went down 45% in the early 90s through the recession that Paul Keating said we had to have. And through those years, as I said, we lost 45% of our volume, which is mainly in the premium beer market outside of South Australia. So we maintained more or less our sales in South Australia, but we lost a lot of our volume outside of South Australia. And then after a few years, we started to kick off with good growth in South Australia through the latter part of the 90s. And then, as you can see, through the 2000s, again, we had a growth spurt. And you can just see probably those last 2008, 2009, where probably there's been a little bit of, maybe a little bit of slowing in the growth as a result of the financial stresses in the economy. And that's the growth story as well there in terms of Pale Ale, which is 65% of all our beer now. So the growth of the company's beer volume has tracked along with that of Pale Ale in particular. And it's a function of having products and, of course, good advertising, but also you need to improve distribution, which is what we did over the last few years through Premium Beverages, and we've grown from less than 8,000 customers nationally to getting close to 12,000 customers. So that's hotels and bottle shops and so forth. So that's important to drive the distribution out through the rest of Australia, and we've got a lot more work to be done in that regard as well. So there's still some more opportunity for growth. And before we leave home brew and malt extract and home brew in particular, I just want to mention here that the home brew seems to be rather counter-cyclical in the sense that in the early 90s we had quite strong growth in home brew sales, as you can see. So it does seem that in recessionary times when discretionary expenditure is being hit, then those people who are happy to do it for themselves and brew at home do take up the hobby or go back to the hobby. And we see that in the home brew sales, and it seems to be reflected in the last couple of years where, although we have been having a lot of decline in sales through the good years, it looks like now we're seeing some growth. And that's total volume, which includes exports, which haven't really picked up as much. Domestically, we're selling about 10% more each of the last 2 years in terms of our home brew. So quite gratifying. It's the profitability is not so great as selling beer, but nonetheless it's nice that there's a business that actually gets better during the recession. I just want to touch on the Australian situation, the total beer market, just to make a couple of points here. Here again you can see in the early 90s, during that last recession, beer sales did go down nationally. So we went from about 19.5 million hectolitres. As brewers, we talk about hectolitres being 100 litres. 19.5 million hectolitres down to a bit over 17 million hectolitres. And there you can see the volume's been pretty well static for the last 15, 16 years. But there's more to it than that. Total alcohol went down during the recession, well, from the late 80s onwards anyway, and that's been reflected clearly. The blue there at the top of the graph is the decline in beer sales, and there was a lot of substitution of people drinking wine instead of beer through the 80s and into the early 90s. And then you can see from the 2000s onwards there's been a bit of growth in in the RTD market, which of course has been nicely suppressed for us through the government increase in excise on RTDs. So not that it's made a lot of difference to beer, but it might just help consumers to make the sensible choice of drinking beer instead of RTDs. I do want to make a point here where this graph is a bit hard to look at, and I apologise for that, but one of the analysts has drawn the conclusion, or tried to draw the conclusion here, that as unemployment goes up, then people start spending less, and they spend less on beer. So although beer sales, you know, to some degree seem inelastic, they probably do go down a bit with rising unemployment. So the top graph is the actual growth or fall in employment, and then the bars represent declines or increases in beer sales. So a couple of times through this period, the last 30 years or so, 40 years, there's been increases in unemployment and declines in beer sales, and vice versa. But the good story is that Australia is now drinking more premium beer, and this, although we're not all that, you know, we're not drinking as much premium beer as in other countries, nonetheless, over the last several years, there's been an increase in the proportion of the total beer market, which is premium beer, and that's good for a number of reasons, which I'll go into, but in particular that the margin on premium beer is a little bit greater, and of course the opportunity to advertise and promote is aided by the better margins in those beers, and overall it's a win-win situation in terms of the premium beers representing a greater portion of the proportion of the market. Just to focus briefly on Lion Nathan, because this is some data that is available. Lion Nathan's share of the market or volumes went down through the 90s, as I mentioned, and then sort of stabilised. And the last couple of years, there's been a bit of growth, which does include the fact that they bought Bogues in Tasmania, but they have seemed to have got their marketing efforts better organised. And they've been bringing out a number of new beers, as has Foster's, but it has resulted in a growth in the volumes for Lion Nathan. And we can see here, a bit hard to look at this graph as well, but the dark blue is the proportion of spend by Foster's on promotional advertising. Promotional advertising meaning retail advertising as opposed to consumer advertising in the broader sense. But Lion Nathan has been spending a little bit more in the last couple of years, and in particular they've been doing that to promote their newer products. And those newer products have been at a higher cost or a higher price. So Lion Nathan's been able to increase their prices at about 4.7% over the last several years versus general inflation of 2.7%, and that was better than they were achieving in the preceding 10 years. And as a result of that, their profitability has gone up. So I think it's a relatively good story for them that their profitability's gone up, they're spending more on advertising, and in particular in relation to product innovation and differentiated products, particularly in the premium beer market. So just making a few points, I'm not a marketing man, but just I guess a few practical points to mention about advertising from our perspective. As I've said before, we've had a lot of good success in recent years in promoting our beers in South Australia and outside of South Australia, and we've appreciated not only the assistance obviously of KWP in that